It's probably safe to say that few of the thousands of motorists who daily cross Springbank Bridge over the Coves give a thought to the waters below. And even fewer probably understand the Coves is a vital part of a vast water drainage system that starts at historic Commissioners Road and runs downhill all the way to the Thames River. Although no one is quite sure whether the name is singular or plural, or even why the name was chosen, the Coves is, or are, one of London's most unusual ecological treasures. An abandoned meander of the Thames River that dates back more than 200 years, the Coves was once a continuous waterway that's gradually filled in. Today, it is 3 ponds strung out like pearls on a curled necklace hanging below the river. Once a popular meeting place for all manner of social, recreational, even military pursuits in the growing community of London, the Coves gradually fell into neglect. Excess storm drain runoff caused erosion. Many of the beautiful spaces were strewn with garbage. The ponds slowly choked on muck and weeds. To the rescue came a group of Crusaders. Friends, they called themselves, first with a determination and ultimately with a cohesive vision to restore the Coves to its former natural splendor. This is the story of a community's fight to save an aquatic curiosity and to enhance the sub-watershed which drains into it. A story of how people really can make a difference, even if it's only one tree at a time. A story of how a dedicated group working with and occasionally against City Hall can accomplish far more than they ever dreamed possible. Although you won't find a plaque or a marker, or indeed recognition of any kind, the history of the Coves and the history of the City of London are forever linked. The meander or oxbow of the Thames River from which the Coves was created began about here, near the Canadian National Railway Bridge. And it ended about here, not far from the Greenway pollution plant. So this is ground zero for London's history. Let's examine why that is.
Well, there's any number of reasons why the history of the Coves is important, but one of them is that every history of the City of London begins on the same day. And that was March the 2nd, 1793, when the Lieutenant Governor of Upper Canada, John Graves Simcoe, passed through this area with a party that included Joseph Brant and 20 Mohawks. Theirs was the first recorded sighting of the Coves. And in fact, they stopped and Lieutenant Littlehales, who was with this party, recorded in some detail the nature of the Coves and the fact that even as of that date, the River Thames had punched through the oxbow and created this island that is the Coves.
We're standing on what I would think is perhaps the most important historical site in the history of the City of London. This is where the meander flowed out again into the main course of the river. And it's also the place where Simcoe and his party, who had been in Fort Detroit and then had come back up through the Longwoods Trail and arrived here in 1793. They camped here that night and then in the morning walked up to the forks of the river. And it was at that point that Simcoe declared that indeed this would be the site the new site for the capital of Upper Canada, which was to be called Georgiana. Now, Georgiana didn't happen, but indeed our city of London has happened. But truly, when one thinks of the import and the beginnings of the city, it's here, within perhaps 100 yards of where we're standing right now.
Within a few years of that, there were also other early passers through in this area, prominent individuals who recorded that there were what they described as old Indian cornfields on the opposite bank of the Thames River, near where the Coves railway bridge is now. So there's a great deal of history there that begins in that earliest period, some decades before the town of London was even founded in 1826.
The center of the new community was the courthouse, on which construction began in 1827 and which quickly began drawing people to the wilderness around the forks. Within half a century, London had grown into a community with girth and swagger. Dundas Street in 1871. A decade later, Dundas and Richmond again. And by the 1890s, real streetcars. There were changes around the Coves as well. The surrounding farmland was slowly giving way to new homes, and the military was arriving.
It would appear as if the military interest in the Coves area begins probably in the early 1860s with the raising of the county regiments. And the county regiments, of course, and battalions required a place to practice, and also the issues surrounding Canada and its relationship with America, and the need to defend the borders. So the military began practice shooting on the Coves through renting the land from the MacArthur family and the Bogues, who were the two major land holders in that area. The military proceeds to use it on an intermittent basis up until 1901. And in 1901, the federal government determines that they need a permanent range, and they purchase the land from the MacArthurs and the Bogues for use as a range. And we've seen the Order in Council signed by Wilfrid Laurier, the Prime Minister, which is in the National Archives in Ottawa. So the military then began using the range or the area as a very serious range from that point onward.
In 1890, South London was annexed into the city. In 1922, this astounding aerial photograph shows clearly South London was growing. The photograph was one of the first non-military uses of aerial photography in Canada, painstakingly rendered from dozens of individual plates. The Coves was also becoming a popular recreation spot for hiking, skating, even fishing, as captured by famous London artist Paul Peel.
My own personal experience at the Cove was, I guess it's sort of difficult to describe. It was a place where you could essentially be in the bush, or I guess communing with nature. It had all of the various components, mature trees, it had water. There's a certain gratification to be had in walking in the bush. And indeed, this is what you could do there. If you found it necessary to run across rubbery ice, if that was part of where you got your jollies, you could do that in the Coves as well. And And to some degree, there was an element of risk when you run across rubbery ice that you've got to sort of keep moving or else you very quickly become wet. Also the building of rafts and so on, which is something that some of our youth are prone to do and certainly experiment with ropes in trees and swinging through the trees and things of that nature. All of that was doable in the Coves, and there was no adult supervision.
Dennis Pettit remembers those days of freedom in the Coves too. Now a retired teacher and coach, Dennis was part of a group on Erie Avenue discovered in the 1950s, up here.
Well, we're standing in front of the original tree, so to speak. This is where the Erie Eagles, which I was a part of many, many years ago, to 52 to be exact, when I first got here in 1957. In this tree, and you can see the Erie Eagle sign here, we had what was called the fort. I was up quite a ways, typical of younger teenage guys, and we decided we were going to build a tree house or a tree fort. And needless to say, seeing some of the photographs, the Free Press came down to see us a few times. It was quite a place. We had a porch, we had a wood-burning stove, a living room, another little room off to the side, more going towards the Coves that way. This tree and the fort sure brings back a lot of memories, and we had fun here. We really did. Everybody heard about it. The people come back here to have a look at this thing because it was no small affair. It was quite large, and to get up there was not easy. We made sure of that. That was our little private place, I guess you'd say, and teenage guys in those days wanted to get together and have a good time and tell lies and have fun and that kind of stuff. But that's basically what it was.
After the Second World War, the Canadian government sold the shooting range. The Wolf family bought the major portion.
Mr. Wolf was apparently a paint manufacturer in Czechoslovakia, as near as I know. And but one of the conditions to emigrating to Canada following the Second World War was that you become involved in farming. You had to play some role in farming. The Wolf family bought the property, a significant piece of the property of the old range. I think it amounts to some 68 acres, and planted an orchard there, which still exists, but essentially fulfilled the role of allowing him to, I guess, honor whatever commitments that were necessary relative to the issues surrounding farming and immigration to Canada. So the paint factory started in a house that essentially is still there, and grew and grew and grew.
Eventually, Alma Paints would be sold, ultimately in 2000, to Valspar, one of North America's largest paint makers. They closed the London factory, and in 2004, all the buildings were removed, except the original home. The property remains for sale. That leaves one historic mystery to clear up. The Coves, singular or plural?
Originally, if you look at the earliest maps, they all refer to it as the Cove in the singular, because essentially it was one big bend in the old oxbow of the river. But over time, as the European settlers cleared the forests and put the land surrounding the coves under agriculture, creeks that flowed into the coves carried silt into the coves. And this began a process where the major creeks began to strangle the coves into three separate ponds. And that's a natural enough process, despite the fact that man is involved. But to exacerbate matters, the City of London after World War II found it to be a convenient place for a landfill.
So when the shift from cove to coves actually occurred, that remains to be seen, but clearly I think the major references are to the coves in the plural form at this particular point in its history.
Have you ever wondered where the water goes when it rains? If you live anywhere inside the red line, you live within the Coves sub-watershed. And in the sub-watershed, the water flows into storm drains and down into a series of pipes or creeks to the Coves, and out the far end, into the Thames River. The story of the Coves is first and foremost a story of water and the journey it follows, and sometimes the destruction it causes as it flows from south of Commissioners Road downhill to the river. Pat Donnelly is now the Urban Watershed Program Manager for the City of London. He begins the story a few blocks south of Commissioners Road, at the point where water begins to run downhill towards the Coves.
Here in the Coves, this is the Highland Woods Park and is an important component of this whole sub-watershed and how water moves from south to north in this location and eventually flows to the Coves ponds. The route is one that is both on the surface and underground. What we have is here a surface feature, so this was mimicking the natural way that the water would have transported, which is through the creeks and the rivers, and in this area it's what's referred to as London South Creek. And the London South Creek area is about half of the entire sub-watershed for the Cove. So this used to be a fairly large creek at one time. It doesn't look like it here where we're standing in Highland Woods Park, but as we get further on downstream, I'll call it, towards the Coves, you'll see that the watercourse itself is much grander where it's exposed to the surface. We are at the Elmwood Gateway, which is the downstream end of the London South Creek, just before it enters the Cove. This ravine, which used to be where London South Creek emptied into the Coves, was a very steep eroding gully. And this gully or ravine was providing a lot of sediment into the Coves and actually causing some of the Coves to shrink and to fill up. That's a natural process that over the decades will occur, but part of our challenge here is we're trying to maintain the Coves in a relative pristine state so they don't fill up.
The ravine as well was partially filled in during the 50s and 60s with landfill. So it was dug out, the pipes set, the ravine filled back in, and what we're seeing here, when we look off here to the east, is a restoration of the ravine par excellence. This is an amazing rehabilitation and shows what can be done when the will is there to do it. So down the road, I imagine in probably 10 or 15 years, you will not know that this was all bare clay dug out in the year 2000. So a super job done shows that it can be done.
This is the outlet of the Elmwood storm drain, which is also the outlet of the South London Creek. This structure eliminates erosion by the fact that we've already naturalized the entire ravine, allowed the water to flow under the ground through a pipe and actually outletting at this location. So approximately 95% of the erosion has already been eliminated from the ravine, which means that what's coming out of here is water and not sediment-laden water, which would have been the case if the ravine was left as it was. So it's very much a successful environmental project in that we've put a pipe in the ground which is big enough to actually have the capacity to take all the water from South London Creek and outlet it safely into the center Cove Pond. We are on the grounds of Arthur Ford Public School, which is in the headwaters of the Cove subwatershed. We are in the westerly portion of the headwaters, and so all the water in this area is going to the north towards the Coves ponds. This area is a nature park which the school put together and planted a number of years ago, and it forms an outdoor amphitheater for the students to use as an outdoor classroom. There are a few areas where the creek shows itself, and it's referred to as Silver Creek in this area of the subwatershed. And Silver Creek is a feature that again is the major watercourse draining into the coves and is about a half of the subwatershed. The whole subwatershed is 700 hectares, so it's about 350 hectares that drains through this area and eventually to the Cove subwatershed and the Coves ponds.
We're standing here at the banks, on the banks of a ravine that goes down into the Coves ponds. And you can see that erosion is a significant problem here. And will, down the road, of course, jeopardize or put in danger any structures that are built along the banks. The speed of the water is one of the factors, needless to say, that water comes down to the coves faster than it has in the history of the coves, and this clearly is creating problems in these ravines.
We have this huge area that drains into the coves. There isn't any stormwater management per se which slows the water down unless we get all the neighborhood residents to actually use rain barrels and cisterns and slowing it down on their property before it releases into the storm drain, and that's the only way that function can actually happen.
And so the water flows on, down through the coves, through a gate to stop backflow flooding from the Thames and onto the river. What it needs is someone to clean up the mess. By the late 1980s, at least, it was obvious the coves needed a friend. Lots of them, in fact, if the area was to survive as one of London's ecological jewels. And one by one, they started to arrive to form cleanup parties. One of those early friends was Alan Ralph, vice principal at nearby Manor and Highland Park Public School.
I became involved with the cleanup of the coves in my role as a vice principal at Manor and Highland Park School. That would be in the late 80s, early 90s. And the students who used the coves as a backyard playground almost used to complain about the mess down there, and they wanted to do something about it. The kids called them dumping grounds for things like free press newspaper boxes, mattresses, grocery carts, bicycles, stolen appliances. All that sort of thing would end up somehow or another in the ponds or adjacent thereto. There was a great mess there, and the kids wanted it cleaned up. And so they said, we'll volunteer to do it, and over time, that's exactly what they did. We made an initial effort to clean it up, and then in subsequent years, that initiative grew.
Alan Ralph and Tom McClenahan, principal at nearby Arthur Ford Public School, were friends, and both had an abiding interest in the environment, and in particular, the shabby condition of the coves. When they each retired, that interest began to flame.
there were a lot of citizens in the community very upset about the conditions too. So I would say it was a common coalescing, if you like, of a number of people, community members, school administrators, outsiders, coming together and saying, let's see if we can't form a group to do something about the condition of the coves, a long-term plan, let's say. And so we decided to call ourselves the Friends of the Coves, and then it became Friends of the Coves Sub-Watershed, and then it was all history.
I have no idea how many times we had coffee and discussed the future of what it was we could do. And after about a year, we came up with the idea, one, we had to have an incorporation in order to be a not-for-profit and have grants and so on, things like that. We got on our way, and then the first thing, I think, we addressed was the issue surrounding a report. It ended up being one of the most extensive reports on the condition of an urban subwatershed, I believe, that had been done to that point anywhere in Canada. Here, indeed, you can see that there are a number of things that could be done and are being done and will yet be done. So clearly this is something that got us up and running and underway.
With a substantial grant from the Trillium Foundation, the fledgling organization got to work, not only detailing what was worrisome about the condition of the coves and the surrounding watershed, but some idea how to begin repairs. Pat Donnelly, then a consultant, was engaged to gather information to write the report.
The subwatershed study was completed a fairly extensive set of recommendations. We had 59 in total. And what we did was we grouped them into four main categories. The first one is public access. The Coves is an area that has been primarily bounded by private land. So we needed to have public land, city-owned land, so people could actually access the Coves. We've made some great strides in the last few years on that, but still a long way to go. Number two, education and awareness. The Coves ESA, just like other environmentally significant areas in the city like Sifton Bog, Westminster Ponds, are special for a number of different reasons, and making sure people are aware of them and are able to interact with them is important. Number three is ecological restoration. Because it is an urban area, we do have impacts, negative impacts on those ESAs, and we need to be able to put plans in place to restore certain areas. Last but not least is monitoring and stewardship. We need to know how well we're doing in these restoration activities and whether we are moving forward positively, and to make sure that the coves are a jewel that continues into the future.
The next step was to take it to City Hall, to London's planning department, and ultimately get it passed by City Council.
Well, initially, we were pretty intimidated and pretty frightened about the prospect of going to speak to anybody at the city about our interest and our effort. But through some common collective thinking, we said, look, we're intelligent people, we can speak articulately, let's go down there and speak to whomever they give us.
I think it was a surprise to council, a surprise to a lot of different people, that this was a community, a grassroots organization that came up with the idea of doing this. So, there are extra copies of the agenda and the minutes of the last meeting, in case you did not write your own.
It seems like the bog is full.
To implement the report over time, City Council proposed an implementation committee which would include members of the Friends of the Cove, representatives from the city administration, and from the Upper Thames Conservation Authority.
This implementation committee has been meeting now for approximately 5 years, has met almost somewhere between 35 and 40 times, each time dealing with specific issues and projected remedial responses. So this, to some degree, has kept Friends of the Coves connected with City Hall. And we feel that clearly Friends of the Coves cannot carry the ball by themselves, that we require significant partners. Our most significant partner, of course, is the City of London and probably the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority. So both of whom have significant roles to play in the maintenance of the Coves and the Coves subwatershed.
Friends of the Coves have, to their credit, jumped on this and with dogged tenacity have pushed this along as they should to make these kinds of decisions happen for the community.
I guess the other element is, to some degree, because this was citizen-driven, I think people began to think, well, wow, if one group of citizens can do this, why couldn't others do that?
Direction of the Friends comes from its board of directors and a staff of one, sometimes two, who gather regularly to plan activities and to keep pushing on a broad front unresolved issues and uncompleted tasks from the watershed plan. The energy comes from its ever-expanding army of volunteers.
Resources, of course, are one of the big things, and we were lucky enough to construct a board of very interesting and interested, significant people. But at the same time, we recognized that there were many cases when these people were prepared to give advice, but not necessarily to do the heavy lifting. A significant amount of those things, monitoring and so on, required a degree of expertise that simply was not on the board. But the one thing that the board did have was an amazing problem-solving ability, because they came at things from different directions. The issue of volunteers is one that is extremely important, and there are, I think, many occasions when people say, well, wow, that all sounds really interesting what you're doing. How could I be involved? And well, during the course of a year, there's opportunities to be involved in a number of different activities.
The key to the Friends' success has been facilitating the efforts of those citizens who want to get involved.
Volunteers are a valued and essential resource for Friends of the Coves. They help the organization deliver on its mission, which is to enhance the quality of life in the community by protecting, conserving, and engaging in wise stewardship of the Coves watershed.
We want this area to be pretty, and so we kind of let nature take its course, but we still do some gardening. However, if you take all the dead stuff away, then this place will end up unfertile in the spring because there's not enough nutrients in the soil.
Yeah, so volunteers come from all over the community. They come from youth groups such as guides and scouts. We have students from the university that volunteer. We have lots of elementary school students that help us plant the trees in the spring and fall time. And a lot of community members will help at events which gets the word out about Friends of the Coves.
She says to attack them, she says that we're not. Who saw me? Well, she saw me, Eva saw me. I think there's one. Go! I don't see it. Yeah, but smell.
These days, hundreds of people count themselves as volunteers for the Friends of the Coves. They plant and maintain trees, maintain the butterfly garden in Greenway Park, clean out bird nests, and pick up garbage. Volunteer efforts haven't been restricted to the area right around the ponds, but take place elsewhere in the subwatershed too. In the woods at the west end of Briscoe Street, tree planting activities have been ongoing for several years. And in Euston Park, once a landfill site, volunteers have been busy. Today, the garbage has grown over, wildflowers bloom, and a forest is flourishing.
The Friends of the Coves has been involved in Euston Park for probably, let me see, somewhere around 4 to 5 years, particularly in pushing to have some, it was at one time all mowed, completely mowed. And it's now been reduced to pathways. These sections are mowed, but the rest is left unmowed. As well, along the verge of the forest, there was a significant growth of buckthorn, which is an invasive species that essentially prevents the forest from moving out into the meadow. All of the buckthorn has been removed here, and the verges have been replanted with the native hardwoods and Carolinian species that normally would have been here in the beginning. We're also very keen on this being part of the ESA, and that a concerted plan be made relative to where are we going, where are we trying to get to for this particular piece of property.
The Coves is such an important spot, something we certainly had to protect.
You just come down and it's like stepping into another world.
It's just a true gem in the middle of a city. It's really a diamond in the rough.
There's just always more to explore, more creatures to encounter.
You can lose yourself inside the city, in a forest. That's cool.
The Coves today is more than simply a nice place to watch the water. It's a seasonal kaleidoscope of scenic vistas, fresh wildflowers, colorful birds, and especially some curious animals. It could be better, of course, and many Londoners are working hard from different perspectives to make it so. But in the here and now, well, the Coves watershed is many wonderful, often unusual, and ever-changing things to both residents of the area and those who come to visit. London artist Tom Benner lived in the neighborhood while his children were growing up, a connection that ultimately led to his creating 9 art panels that illustrate the ecological wealth of the Coves. One of his panels became a famous poster for the Friends. 2 others were featured for several years on the walls of the Governor General's office in Ottawa.
I just moved to Orchard Street, which backs onto the Coves. And being in the middle of inspiration, talk about inspiration, I just looked out the backyard and there were the Coves. So we came up with the idea of doing a poster of one of the 9 pieces. It was like as if you walked around the Coves. So each piece, it was talked about a different tree or a different group of things. And we took the one Cove piece that had the old sycamore tree in it and made that into one of the posts for a poster. I mean, there's memories that I have with my kids. The first freeze over and skating across the Coves to go and visit these people on the other side. And it was just a beautiful skate right across to go and visit somebody. There's not a lot of that happens in family life. And people are cloistered away, or that's why the Coves is such an important spot to be. And I felt that, you know, that was something we certainly had to protect. And, you know, if what I did adds to it a little bit. I mean, that's a pretty important thing to do.
Photographer Barry Davenport, he's more likely to answer to his nickname Bear, lives at the top of the hill overlooking the Coves. Camera in hand and his dog Hannah at his side, he walks around the ponds 2 or 3 times each day.
Get up every morning and have my morning coffee and grab my dog, and off we go down to the Coves. Probably spend, I don't know, anywhere between half an hour to an hour and a half per trip. It's good exercise. Something I've done for, well, close to 25 years. Best picture would be of the great blue herring. I'd say it would be a full-grown adult. We went, there was an afternoon walk, probably around 3 or 4 o'clock, and set up the tripod after sneaking up on them. And 100 and some odd pictures, I think it was about 149 pictures later, got him catching a carp that was probably a good 10 inches in length. And instead of eating it like this, he turned sideways, so you got the sideways view of the fish going down his little tiny neck. I'd say that would be about the best picture I've gotten. I take a lot of pictures. Other than that, I just enjoy the scenery. It's, I don't know, all different kinds of nature. You got your migrating birds, which will be coming up soon. Just an outing, you know, you can lose yourself inside the city in a forest. That's cool.
Helga Rupi is an author and historian, and she's gathered stories from old newspapers about the Coves for an historical novel set in southwestern Ontario. She lived up on Warncliffe Road as a youngster, and her parents were very involved in the nearby German-Canadian Club. In the 1970s, the old military office for the former rifle range was for sale. The club was interested and eventually decided to build instead.
So my parents decided that they would buy the property for their own private use and eventually move down here. And meanwhile, they rented out apartments in the building. There are 3 of them. And my parents just never got around to moving down here until in 2000, my mom died and I inherited the place. And I moved down here with my husband and my 2 children. And my 2 youngest were born here. And we just love this place. My favorite place at the present is the apple orchard. I homeschool and we like to do nature walks through there. There's just always more to explore, more creatures to encounter. We can watch the plants go through their annual cycle. And it's just glorious.
Hard to get excited about gold. Well, you just see movement and you get all hopeful. You get hopeful that it's something. You get hopeful and then.
Len Manning and Benjamin Vaughn, along with Ben's wife Jessica, are friends and birders who use the entire Coves watershed as their home field.
I guess I've lived here in this area on and off since I was 6 years old, so that's a long time. So about 27 years been in the area. So I spent a lot of time down here as a teenager, usually for different reasons than I come down now. But now I come down for the bird watching and butterflies and other wildlife, and take the dogs on a walk, and yeah, it's just an absolutely gorgeous spot. It's right in my backyard, so pretty fabulous.
I've lived in London for about 7 years now, and I've actually been living in the Coves sub-watershed area for the past 6 or so years. I live on a little area called Highland Woods, which is actually the beginning of the watershed of the Coves, so it is considered part of the Coves. And I've been birding in this area since that time, and spent a lot of time down here looking for birds, and It's just a true gem in the middle of the city. It's really a diamond in the rough, and I really enjoy spending time down here.
This is a really good birding area because there's lots of natural and varied habitat. Lots of different plant species, tree species. We've got water, we've got fields, we've got Carolinian forest. So there's creatures that nest here in the summer and raise their kids. And it's a great stopover for migrant birds arriving in the spring and leaving in the fall. So it's, you know, you come down here on some days and there's just thousands of birds and, you know, hundreds of different species. It's a real magical place.
The habitats here are varied from open ponds to mixed forest. At Euston Park, you've got an open sort of savanna meadow
grassland
area where you get those kind of species. You've got specifically the West Pond, the north section of the West Pond, which often has mud flats, so you're going to get all sorts of shorebirds in there and herons, and it's just such a wide variety of habitats in a very small area. It's a high that I cannot explain. And
I think it's such a natural, peaceful environment. You come away from the city and the madness of your life, and you come down here, and there's trees and sunlight and plants and all these beautiful birds flitting around, and it's just something I don't know how to explain it. There's something about the magic of the wild, and you know, the beauty of nature. You can just come down, and it's like stepping into another world.
Yeah.
And it's very calming, you're very calm and really excited at the same time. It's just a magical place.
Am I taking the tail?
Yep, you take
the Tom McClenahan has lived in the Coves watershed all his life. He's watched Euston Park evolve from gravel pit to kite-flying heaven.
This is one of my favorite places for flying kites. I bring my grandchildren here, and my own children have been here as well. And I guess to some degree, it reminds me, particularly when I know the history here. This was part of the MacArthur farm. They received one of the early grants, Crown grants, and their farm property stretched all the way from Commissioner's Road down to the river on the north. So what we're seeing here is also regenerating itself, which I think is really rather important, and has morphed from a closed landfill site into an urban meadow. I'm really quite certain it will become a significant asset to the city's parks and rec and ESA systems.
Dana Poulton is an archaeologist who lives near the Coves and who is responsible for gathering much of the information of the history and archaeology of the area for the Coves watershed study. His favorite season is the fall, when the trees are turning, a time of year he calls magnificent.
My daughter spent all of her life here. She was born 21 years ago, and when she was little, we'd go down in the Coves all the time and have a look at the wildlife and the turtles sunning themselves on the logs. And she and her friends even gave our dog the nickname the Coves Hippo, as he was fond of wading in the water. So it's a place that has kind of very personal kind of family memories for me too.
Although the Coves is a park like no other in London, it's still a park, and as such, the Coves is subject to the rules and expectations imposed by the city and the surrounding community. Those twin forces now must harmonize to ensure the ecology is protected while allowing in some way the continued public enjoyment of this natural wonder.
It was the long forgotten and neglected environmentally significant area, And you know, the vision of the Friends of the Coves has I think inspired the public to take another look at it and to say, hey, this is a really important part of London's history, natural history, and we need to embrace it and protect it and showcase it, and showcase what wonderful wildlife and ecological processes are happening there, despite all the disturbance that it has been subject to over the course of its history. One of the recommendations of the Coves sub-watershed plan was to undertake a conservation master plan for the environmentally significant area. And we were approached by the Friends of the Coves implementation committee, and they said, when can we do this? And we said, okay, well, you know, we own enough land now in terms of parks, and we want to get going on developing some trails, so this would be a good time to start the master plan process.
The study is underway, and all sorts of ideas are starting to tumble forth. They start with a new gateway to the Coves at the corner of Warncliffe and Elmwood.
Officially, you know, what you see here is outside of the environmentally significant area. But what we're thinking of is that, in fact, it will be a gateway to the Coves environmentally significant area, or ESAs as we call them. Good spot for public to come, perhaps park at this location, perhaps gather at this location, and then head off into an ESA where it's a different kind of use. But right here, what we're hoping to do is bring the Friends of the Coves together with people from Old South who have an interest in redevelopment of this land. We have typical park construction that you may see happen in a location like this, but the concept is totally up in the air at the moment.
What complicates matters, of course, is the fact much of the land, both inside the peninsula and around the ponds, is privately owned. There's the German-Canadian Club and its related sports fields. There are houses in the center. There are houses on the perimeter that back onto public lands. There's a large trailer court. And the biggest chunk of private land, now for sale, is the former Valspar paint factory.
Well, the process of kind of public acquisition of land to help preserve the Coves in a larger context is certainly one of the most important initiatives. And the ideal, to my mind, and I think probably in the minds of most of the Friends of the Coves, would be to acquire the Valspar property to incorporate it into the public land holdings.
The significant piece of the Valspar property is clearly something that is pivotal to the forward motion here within the Coves. It's 68 acres, and we need to make sure that that comes into the public domain.
We have an interest for sure, yes. When you're looking at environmentally significant lands, while they don't have to be owned by the city, and there are many that aren't, we think that if they are owned by the city, there's a better way to protect and manage them, and certainly then you can permit public access. And so certainly part of that site, we would love to be part of a public open space system. May or may not have trails within that area, but certainly for long-term protection enhancement, part of that site may be good to add to the public mix.
Meanwhile, as the ESA study continues and plans are developed to protect and enhance the Coves, other ideas are being pursued. The Friends, for example, are raising money to create a heron rookery in East Pond using 6 feet of sediment.
We took out a canoe to test the sediment levels. We were not sure how deep the sediment is, so roughly we took out a stick to measure how deep the sediment levels are in the various areas of the pond. There are a lot of invasive species now, and we want to drain the pond and then use that sediment that we just measured to create some nesting areas, rookeries for great blue herons. And so the sediment would be put into some retaining structures and an island built. And great herons then could nest, and, as well as other birds. Then we would refill the pond. It would do that naturally because it's a sub-watershed. And then we would put in native species of fish such as pickerel, trout, and bass.
Longer term, both the City of London and the Friends are united in a vision of the Coves as a natural oasis in the midst of a growing metropolis, perhaps one with an educational focus.
We need to keep in mind always that the several focus groups that we've done continually refer to the water and access to the water. And we've been told that a significant number of times, that clearly people want to be able to access the water.
I think everybody is together with the same vision that over time the place will only get better ecologically. It will have enhancements from that perspective. You will see, hopefully, more wildlife species back in this area, and ultimately a master plan that talks about appropriate public use. And ultimately that the area is well used, that the community appreciates it for its environmental significance, and we continue to have the efforts of the community when we talk about naturalization projects and planting trees and garbage cleanups, that everybody's on board and continues to do that work.
The naturalization of this area, I think, is essential as well, so that we can come down here and see what this was probably like in the beginning, understand how everything is interconnected. And we need to continually remind people that we are one of the players on this planet, as are all the other flora and fauna that you see within the coves, and animal life and so on. They're all interconnected. And I think that's an essential learning that needs to be taught over and over again to each generation. And I can think of no better place for it to be learned than right here within the coves and within the greater Coves sub-watershed.